If you have ever tried to read through the Old Testament and suddenly hit a wall of ancient, brutal violence, you know the immediate knot that forms in your stomach. As a reader trying to make sense of faith, stumbling across these accounts can feel intensely isolating and confusing. You see this starkly in the historical record of Genesis 34. The text details the story of a young woman named Dinah, who is defiled by a local prince named Shechem. Dinah's brothers, Simeon and Levi, discover what happened. Rather than pursuing a proportionate or just resolution, they engineer a trap. They tell the men of Shechem City that they can only integrate and intermarry with their family if every single male undergoes a sacred religious rite, circumcision. The men agree. But 3 days later, while the entire male population of the city is bedridden, healing, and completely vulnerable, Simeon and Levi walk through the gates with swords. They execute every man, plunder their homes, seize their wealth, and take Dinah back. It is a calculated, methodical massacre. Through this entire bloodbath, the text records no thunder from heaven, no angels intervening. God remains completely and utterly silent. Traditional religious environments often struggle with texts like this. To protect the idea of a flawless, literal rulebook, sermons often skip the chapter entirely or dress up human cruelty as divine conviction. When the text describes an atrocity and the pulpit calls it holy, it forces a wedge between a person's moral intuition and their faith. To read these ancient texts while keeping our moral baseline intact, we have to change the container we place them in. We have to stop viewing them as literal blueprints of a violent God and start reading them as diagnostic mirrors that reflect humanity's lowest, most corrupt states of existence. Look at the psychological motive driving Simeon and Levi. Their sister was violated, and their immediate response was to assert absolute, violent control over the situation. They forced outward religious conformity onto their neighbors, specifically to paralyze them. They used the exact shape of religion, but emptied it of any internal love or charity. They represent the lethal danger of religious zeal operating without a shred of spiritual wisdom. When their father, Jacob, discovers the slaughter, he is furious. He confronts his sons, telling them that their performative justice hasn't made them righteous. It has made his family a stench to the surrounding world. This concept map breaks down the Hebrew word Jacob uses, ba'ash. It describes physical rot, like dead fish, but Scripture traces a line from physical decay straight into relational decay. Ba'ash is the smell of broken trust, hypocrisy, and ruined relationships. Simeon and Levi won the physical battle, but they left a moral stench in their wake. When religious rules are weaponized to control others without an ounce of internal love, the result is always that exact same rot. The hypocrisy driving people away from modern faith systems today is an ancient, easily recognizable behavior.
This brings us to the burning question. If God is infinite love and not the architect of this violence, why would the divine allow human history to be recorded through such a brutal, uncorrected lens? Theologian Emanuel Swedenborg answers this through accommodation. This timeline maps human spiritual development, starting from tribal infancy. Like a parent using sharp language to keep an ego-driven toddler safe, accommodation means the divine meets humanity exactly where it is in its spiritual immaturity. The ancient tribal societies recording these events could only conceive of authority through the lens of power, wrath, and unchecked vengeance. God accepted the appearance of a silent or wrathful deity in the literal text because a transactional framework was the only language the human ego could register at the time. This silence is anchored in the principle of spiritual freedom. Within this framework, God refuses to destroy human free will through coercion or forced compliance. The silence in Genesis 34 is not a nod of divine approval. It is the tragic result of allowing human beings absolute freedom, even when they abuse that freedom to create a literal hell on earth for their neighbors. Spiritual abuse and the hypocrisy that causes church hurt manifest from the human capacity for evil, allowed by a system that prioritizes free will over divine interference. When we encounter chaos or violation today, our survival setting remains largely unchanged from ancient times. Our immediate instinct is to match the volume of the threat.
I learned a lesson about this years ago while working a summer job hay carting for a farmer named John. We were packed into the cab of a heavily loaded truck. John was driving a bit too fast down a narrow country road, cutting corners, and he accidentally cut a motorcyclist completely off the road. The motorcyclist managed to stay on his bike, but he pulled up next to us at the stop sign, absolutely livid. He was shaking with a cocktail of adrenaline and rage, screaming and swearing. It was a pure display of contagious, volatile outrage. John had a massive temper, and I expected him to shout back. Instead, he did something unexpected. He didn't get defensive. He didn't try to win. He spoke softly, instantly owned his mistake, and systematically de-escalated the man's rage. Simeon and Levi tried to aggressively enforce control over a violation, which ended in a massacre. John refused to enforce control. He utilized calm internal self-regulation to exert a different force: influence. We can never control the chaotic choices, the betrayals, or the angry outbursts of others. We only control our inner response. But calm alignment is surprisingly contagious. When we refuse to participate in the escalation, our quiet self-regulation carries the power to dismantle conflict. By remaining silent in the face of violence, God models non-coercive influence over violent control. If we want to change the world, we have to look past contagious outrage and consider the slower, quieter power of contagious peace.